Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
Right? Like the mainstream is just going to publicize this and put it out. Oh, on tonight's headline news, the MK Ultra program is stronger than ever, you know? They're not going to do that. There's even CIA guys who brag about it openly and say, you know, I'm a guy, I worked for Disney and the CIA. Von Braun saw the television, that 50s, 60s period as the age of television, and a great way to get out your message through the television. And that's why they teamed together and put out, you know, they put out at least 3 movies together, because people just can't wrap their head around this mind control program. And I'm like, well, you're in it. Do you watch television? Because if you watch television, you are a victim of it. As a people, we need to be able to do better, is just discuss things, whether we agree or not. Take the emotion out of it, and let's just have a conversation back and forth and try and find some common ground. This is Matt from the Great Deception Podcast, and you're listening to Airey Brothers Radio. I didn't come into this expecting it, right? I went into it trying to prove that it was bullshit, because I heard that, Disney had ties to the CIA, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, man. There's no way. This is Walt Disney we're talking about. And then as you start peeling back the onion, you're like, oh no, it's real. Yeah, so it broke, and it's funny because I get 2 reactions. I either get one where they're like, okay, that can make sense, or other, you're just crazy. That's there's no way. And it's funny watching the reactions.
Yeah, so there's 11 years between us, and I was already well into high school and sports and athletics, and so my vacations and long weekends and stuff were taken up with athletic competitions. And that's when family on our mother's side kind of immersed themselves and became a Disney family. And Jimmy was in the thick of that as a young pup at 4 or 5 years old. And so for probably a good 20 years, almost at least once, if not twice a year, he was down there doing his thing and had it on lockdown, and was into all the psyops. And I think the first time I eventually made my first trip there, I was like 21. It was like right after my 21st birthday. So I kind of missed the whole boat on it. And being the older guy, I kind of took the red pill a little bit earlier than he did. And so I come home and tell him about these crazy things. And he just, at first would just kind of shake his head at me. And now he's a film student, so he's kind of into it more. And then even more recently, I know that you've gotten into, I was listening to the Swapcast with Legit Bat, and your intro, talking about you're going to do a lot more in November about the World's Fairs and some of those things. And so that's what's kind of been the Tartaria, the mud flood, the World's Fairs. That's kind of what's been stopping me from eating this COVID black pill, and been like a beacon of hope. And just, I've always kind of been into architecture and just always sort of, even when I went to Europe the first time, just kind of scratching my head as to the way that these things are built just doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like, why are the roads and all the pictures still dirt? Like, if they have all these elaborate buildings, why are they still rock and dirt roads? So I think Jimmy wants to get into the Disney stuff first, but I definitely want to pick your brain and talk about the World's Fairs and the Tartaria and the mud flood. And I guess the 1850 is kind of where the timeline starts to, we need to piece things together and start looking into things a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, that's my favorite subject right now, right? Like I said, I've been, for the last, probably like you, I got COVIDed out, right? And I started getting to that black pill stage where things just started, I just felt negative energy every time I looked into it. And I'm like, I need a break from this. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, poof, Tartaria comes. And I'm like, what is this? And then I started reading Howdy McCoskey's book, Exposing the Expositions. And that that flipped my world upside down, because I had never thought, first of all, I'd never really heard of the World's Fairs in the 1800s. Like I had heard some of the later ones, and New York had one in the 80s that I'm pretty sure I went to with my parents, but I don't even know at this point. But yeah, then I started getting into it, and that's another onion, right? You peel back one layer and you're looking at buildings, then you start looking at the mud flood and resets, and it takes you on and I basically worked backwards into it. I started at the World's Fairs, and I'm going, that leads you into the mud flood, which leads you into like cathedrals and the, ethereal energy and all that stuff. And it's just fascinating, and hey, whether it's true or not, whether, we're just, this was just thrown out there as a distraction. I don't care. I'm all in.
Yeah, totally. Have you checked out any of John Levi's videos at all?
I love John. Yeah. I got into him probably last fall. And every Sunday I'm like, oh, new video. Yes. Between totally. Him and Michelle Gibson.
Michelle
does. Oh, she's great. And she's been working a lot with autodidactic lately.
Yep.
And I just love their shows. I could sit there and listen to them all day.
Yeah, like the whole Australia side of things is like a whole other rabbit hole to go down, because what we're taught is that Australia was like a penal colony, right? That's where England took all their prisoners or bad people or ruffians or people they didn't want, polluting their society, and they brought them to this island on the other side of the world. But then, you look at some of the architecture and structures there in New Zealand, and you're like, well, how did these prisoners do this? And why does it look very similar? And then you see like, why do all the Capitol buildings, most of the Capitol buildings throughout the United States look very similar, same design? And why is there a Parthenon in Nashville? So many questions. But yeah, with John, I make my coffee Sunday morning, and I'm like, headphones on, like, let's go.
20 minutes of bliss, know?
Totally.
Talking before, we were talking about the World's Fair, and I think the thing that's interesting is Walt Disney was obsessed with the World's Fair, and his father had worked as a carpenter, I believe, on the World's Fair. But also, if you look into some of the stuff at Disney World, the Crystal Palace is a restaurant, and we all know the Crystal Palace is this famous building that kind of just disappeared from one of the World's Fairs expositions in London, I believe. And then you look at the Carousel Progress and some of the rides that were actually created at the World's Fair. And then I'm sure we'll get into the CIA stuff, but those are just the small connections on what we were talking about from the beginning. And that's just the World's Fair with the connection with Disney.
Yeah. And he, like you said, his father worked there in Chicago in 1893, and then he released, It's a Small World to the world in 1964 at the New York World's Fair. And he was big into the helping with the design of the 64 World's Fair, which kind of led into the layout for Disney World, right? And some of the things like Club 33 that's in out in California, the first one was basically worked with or donated by some of the founders of the World's Fair of 64. They contributed to it. So there's all these connections, and it's funny because it's like a big circle, right? You start seeing all these same parties start connecting on totally different levels. Like you would never associate Walt Disney with World's Fairs or, vice versa. And you get into these things, and it starts, you start making the connections and realizing, oh man, it really is all connected. And it seems like the higher they get up, the more compromised they are, right? You cannot become a Jeff Bezos or a Walt Disney without having some ties or having someone pulling your strings behind the scene and kind of like your controller almost, it seems.
Yeah. And going off of that, if you just look at Epcot, right? That was the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Who did Walt Disney work with to create what the future was going to look like? Warner von Braun. I wonder what he was tied to. Going back to what you were saying, like you become compromised at some point, and there's like pictures of those guys like all buddy buddy, and no one knows what Werner von Braun looks like. If you say, hey, there's like a Nazi next to Walt Disney, people will just be flabbergasted and think you photoshopped it.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, even if you look at the creation of NASA, right? You had Disney, you had Jack Parsons, you had von Braun, and you had
L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology. So, right there, you're looking, you're like, okay, I got a Mason, a rocket scientist, a Nazi, and a Scientologist. Wow, that's interesting. Now, and they also came up with the term science factual, which, you look at that and that's kind of an oxymoron, these days, because, they want you just to believe science, just put your faith in science wholeheartedly, when in reality, science is all about questioning and continuing to question. And so, yeah, from the get-go, the connections, and like you said, you look at Disney and he's connected to the FBI, he's connected to the CIA, he's connected to Nazis. And, you go as far as even current times, Disney, the company, is tied to Epstein's Island. So it's like, oh, it's mind-blowing. It never ends.
That you got into this to sort of debunk it. And was there one particular thing, person, individual that brought this to your attention and you decided to debunk it? Or how did you get to, I need to debunk this?
Well, it was a couple things. One, last year during the pandemic and lockdown and everything, Twitter was just out of control. And there was all these, they were doing a lot of symbolism and saying, oh, this is Disney is satanic, blah, blah, blah. But the one that got me was, there's a meme going around with, it's got what we just talked about, Crowley's face, Parson, but and I looked at that and I'm like, there's no way Disney's in with these guys. So I started digging backwards and I went, okay, let me look at Disney and von Braun. And then that popped up and I was like, okay, let me check Disney and the CIA. And I went, and then I was like, oh man, they were hand in hand in Disney World. And so it was like, it was very eye-opening to see that, I thought I was going to be able to just prove it in 5 minutes and say, okay, I'm gone. And now I'm a year later and I'm still talking about Disney, it's like, oh man. But I enjoy it in the sense that it's helped me from a parent's perspective to help realize what my son is being programmed with. Right. And that it's not just Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. It's not just this innocent cartoons. There, you have to watch and pick and choose which cartoons they can watch, because there are messages and subliminal messaging that's put in there, which, nowadays it's getting even more and more crazy that, you have to really monitor it. But on the other side of it, hey, everything is that way these days. You have to watch everything. You can't just assume, oh, it's on television, it's good for you. Nothing on television is good for you.
No, it is all garbage. I've been, Jimmy and I live in Denver, but we're originally from New Jersey, and I've been back home visiting and doing stuff over here at my parents' house. And, they love their television. And so every once in a while I'll catch it, or I'll sit down and play Jeopardy with them at 7:00. And, the stuff that comes on in between with the commercials and stuff. And even you could probably break down Jeopardy too with some of the programming and whatnot, but it's wild. And going back to what you said about, the Disney programming and being selective. I can remember, I used to be a special education teacher, and I can remember back, we're talking like 15 years ago now, where kids would come in and they'd be like, oh my God, there's this thing in The Lion King and he rustles the leaves and it spells out sex. And then there was, I think, another one with like the Little Mermaid with
penis
like
on the box.
And that was, so here I have, these high school age special education students that are like, and I wasn't even aware, I wasn't, it wasn't in my like lexicon of, I was just like, what are these kids talking about? And so they showed it to me, but it's not until 15 years later we start like, man, those kids, they were hip to stuff way back then.
And it makes you wonder, like, why? Okay, and especially in animation, right? That's created cell by cell, so it has to be put in there intentionally. And you can laugh it off and say, oh, it was just the animators playing a joke, or is it more sinister? And is it subliminal programming, right? Is it for those kids to be able to see it and say, oh, sex, and then, and just break down the barriers slowly, one by one, with little things like that, and like you mentioned, the Little Mermaid cover, or even in the Little Mermaid itself, when Ariel gets married, the priest gets an erection. It's like, why do you have to put that stuff in there? I mean, if this is intended for kids, and obviously kids wouldn't understand that, that joke, that inside joke. So why are you doing it? And that's where I look at Disney and I'm like, okay, it's definitely in with the mind control aspect of some sort of program.
Yeah, and I think we can have this conversation. The three of us can talk about it, and the symbolism there, symbolism, and to us, we know, right? We know the whole medium of entertainment, television, movies was propaganda. That's why it was all started, and that's why Disney first started working with the FBI and the CIA, was to make propaganda cartoons for World War II. And who knows what prior to that? But we know that, and like Rich said before, I'm a film student, and in film history, they teach us all this. Like, they teach us day one, everything was created for propaganda. And I look and I ask these kids, I'm like, well, if it started that and it never stopped, what makes you think they just, all right, we're not gonna brainwash people anymore. We're just gonna go on with it. It never ended, and you can't have that conversation with anyone, right? You can talk to people about, people are aware of Charles Manson, CIA, stuff like that, and they can accept that, and a lot of people can even accept the moon landing, right? But if you talk about things from present time, you're crazy conspiracy theorist. It's like, well, what was going on then? What's the difference?
And there's so many programs like that, right? And their first thing to you is, well, where's your sources, right? Like the mainstream is just going to publicize this and put it out. Oh, on tonight's headline news, the MK Ultra program is stronger than ever. They're not going to do that. But at this, and they did the same thing with the MK Ultra program, right? They said in the mid 70s, oh, it just stopped and we don't do it anymore. Well, if it was so successful previously, why would you stop it? And that your point is spot on there, that they don't stop these things. They just go underground, or they change it, right? They go a different direction, change the name, things like that they've done, and they've done it. I mean, my thing is the United States changed significantly post World War II, right? With the implementation of Operation Paperclip. And once we brought over those Nazi scientists, everything seemed to change. And one of the recent episodes I did on Yuri Bezmenov, who was a Russian KGB agent, who basically said, listen, Russia's whole goal is to make America a communist state, and they will do so without firing a single shot. They will let them do it to themselves. And I really feel like that was the whole mission post World War II, and ever since the Nazis took over. It was, you look at our food, they started poisoning the food, they started putting fluoride in the water and in all sorts of other products, and they started doing mind control on people. You look at things like Operation Mockingbird, where they infiltrated the media. And, it's just one thing after another, where it doesn't seem to benefit the public. It's always at the detriment of the public.
Yeah, there's a lot to unwrap right there. We just touched on one. It's, we're if you're alert to it, it's almost like what Yuri said is unraveling, right in real time before our eyes, with things that are going on in schools, and then just how people are having difficulty with, some people maybe are having difficulty with their like middle school, teenage children, college age kids, with what they're coming home and saying, and trying to battle that battle. And then also, it's almost as if when you take a look at the Operation Paperclip thing, it in my opinion, it almost discredits what World War II was even about, and it's like, and then that ties into the Tartaria, the mud flood, the 1850 type stuff, where there's these different events, whether it's a great fire, whether it's an earthquake, whether it's the bombing of Dresden, where it's like, well, was this? And I just heard, I think John talked about it 2 weeks ago, where they bombed Mount Vesuvius. So it's like, whoa, like, and then because of the magnitude of World War II or what it was fought over, or even going back to, we could talk about the Civil War too. It's like there's these wars that were fought over these issues where it's almost as if, you know, if you even ask a question about the whole scheme of it, then you're almost demonized, or like, oh, you're anti-Semitic, or you're a racist, or so it's the same thing like what they did with the swastika, where, you know, before World War II, the swastika was like a Hindu
Peace.
religious peace symbol, you know, and so it's like up is down, down is up.
Yeah. And it's inversion, right? And that's one of the things you start seeing post World War II is a lot of inversion, where they take good things and pervert them. And so you don't know which way to go with it, right? Like the swastika is a perfect example. For thousands of years, that was a symbol of peace, and it represents the zodiac, right? It's the 4 points of the zodiac coming through. And you know, you start looking at this, and that's why, you know, with Disney specifically, you look at the inversion, and that's what you're getting. People, they get away with a lot of things because they're cartoons, right? And because it's not a person saying it. It's like the Simpsons or the Family Guy. They can get away with a lot more racy things because they're animated. But in the end, it's still the same message getting out. And they love to invert things and subliminally put things in there so that they can't take direct heat for it. And they can say, oh, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? You're just looking too deep into it, when that's how it was created. You know, we're not looking that deep into it. We're just seeing it at face value and seeing that there is this duality to everything. And that gets back to Disney as well, with his ties to Masonry, right? And that's the whole thing with Masonry, is the duality, the left and the right, the two powers. And yeah, so it's all over. You know, you see it more and more now that, you know, and I feel like now, after going through, you know, what we've gone through the past 18 months, it's even more obvious and easier for us to even see. And I don't even think they really attempt to hide it anymore. I think it's just, you know, this is what we're presenting, take it or leave it.
Yeah, and to your point of not hiding it anymore over that past 18 months, I really think it took the past 18 months though to get maybe like someone like me who likes to just keep his head in the sand and not pay attention to things, kind of forced you to either like go be a zombie and get your They Live shot, or wake up and start seeing what's going on around you and seeing duality of things, right? We're talking about symbols, right? They took the rainbow from us. We can't even rep rainbow. Used to be a cool, like rainbows are badass. Can't even rep rainbows anymore. Now it's colors, right? You dye your hair a certain color. You go by a certain pronoun. And even that with pronouns, right? There, minute I walk into a classroom, or you go on an email list for a class, you can tell who you're going to get along with based on if they have that stuff listed or not. Just, and those are the groups they have started. And it's been really prominent the past year and a half.
Oh yeah, it's definitely is. And Disney's really big into it, right? They love putting subliminal programming in their things, like we talked about before with some of the, you know, Lion King and Little Mermaid. But as you dig deeper and deeper into it, and like I said before, animation is created single cell at a time. So everything that they put in there is intentional, and you'll see over and over repeated symbols, you know, whether it's hand gestures or, you know, things that they put in the background that, you know, wouldn't catch your eye, but if you watch it and then once you find out about it, you're like, wow, what? That's inappropriate. Why would they do such a thing? But it's all to get to a message, you know, their message. And what exactly that is, I don't know, but it's not one that is going to benefit us, you know, or benefit our kids.
And how have you navigated that water with your son? I mean, is it just Disney is, you know, you're out in the backyard with the chimney and you're throwing off?
No, we still watch some, you know. I have a tough time because I have a tough time. Like I got to bite my tongue a lot because you know, I'm not going to ruin it for him at the same time, but I'm not also going to just let it slide and let him watch whatever, you know. I got rid of cable probably about a year ago now. So he'll watch some YouTube videos or something like that. We have we actually have Disney Plus. I use my sister's account. Don't tell Disney. But yeah, and I'll still watch some. I really like Disney movies. You know, I grew up on them, but
Yeah.
you know, I watch it with a different set of glasses on now. You know, and that's the thing. It changed the way I look at it, and I can't consume it as much as I used to either. And that's one of the things that I've passed down to him is we don't consume as much television as we used to. You know, growing up, that was the thing to do. You know, if you weren't outside, you were probably watching something or playing a video game. Whereas now I have to, even the video games, you know, they've been co-opted too. So you know, as a parent, you really have to be diligent about what your child consumes, because you know, it's just as critical to their life as the food that they're ingesting. Because if they're receiving, you know, this subliminal programming already, and my son's only 8, so he's at a very vulnerable age, and a very, you know, at that age where he's starting to understand things and make some connections on his own. And to be honest, I'm pretty open with him. You know, we have a real good relationship in that sense, where I can tell him certain things like, you know, buddy, this isn't really right. You know, they're trying to tell you this, when in reality things are like that. You know, especially with a lot of the commercials, you know, the whole LGBT pushing and the Black Lives Matter, and, you know, all the critical race theory stuff that goes on out there. I'm like, you know, I just teach him that, you know, people are people. Don't put people in a box, judge people at face value. And unless you know someone, you cannot make a judgment about them. And it's, you know, so far so good, but I got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but that's good. It's a good start and a beautiful thing. One of the best things I probably did was got rid of cable, and I think it was like 2008. And then I started moving around and shuffling and going from different states and stuff. So TV went out the window in 2010. And not that the laptop or the computer can fill some of those voids. And obviously you can spend a lot of time on YouTube or BitChute or whatever other Rumble, whatever else you're on. You know, these days, but it's definitely, you know, it's good to be mindful of what you're ingesting through your ears, through your eyes, through your mouth, and you know, food is a big thing with us too. So it's good to hear that, and you know, like Ricky Varandas says, it's a ripple effect, you know, and the other thing that we do some research with and have had some people on is in the psychedelic community. So their thing is find the others. And so that's what we're doing here with conversations like this, is that there are other people out there. And even though we might live in Denver, you know, we have this online community of people where we're sharing stuff. And yeah, we're super on board with like the red pills and the white pills, and have definitely tried to avoid the black pills the last 6 to 9 months. What has been, is there been one thing over the other that has kind of been the most disturbing thing that you've found in your research? I know you with Disney, you know, the Project Monarch is another thing that can take you down some dark holes, and we didn't really even touch on the Mickey Mouse Club yet and some of the things that have arisen from that.
Yeah, and that's probably the darkest, right? Is the mind control programs and the connections to Disney, whether it's the Mickey Mouse Club. And what's interesting about that is, you know, we talk about symbols, and you look at Mickey Mouse Club, and what's the acronym for it is MMC, which also correlates with Monarch Mind Control. Or you look at the Mouseketeers, MK, you can get into MK Ultra. So, you know, some, and maybe a stretch, yes, but the more you dig into this stuff, the more you realize that these people they're very smart at some things, and they're very dumb at others. But the other thing is they're persistent. So they will try things over and over again to get it to work. And the one thing that I found, though, you're absolutely right, is the abuse of children, right? Or the mind control programs of children. I actually did a whole episode on mind control as it relates to Disney, the music industry, the film industry, and things like that, and how, you know, you start seeing these symbols of the programming that and they're everywhere, you know, and they don't try to hide it. You know, you get people like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, and, you know, a lot of the Mickey Mouse Club kids come out with a lot of issues, right? And it's not necessarily related to them being celebrity. It's what happened to them while they were on set. You know, you see there's multiple instances of sexual abuse on set. One of the things that, you know, is kind of talked about or not talked about is that they don't really let parents on the set. It's mainly the agents. So again, you're separating the kids from their parents, and that's when a lot of the bad stuff happens. And then you can go, there was a book released in, what was it? I think it was 90, what is his name? Mark Elliott released a book in 93 called Walt Disney, Hollywood's Dark Prince. And it's one of those where I read it and I was like, okay, I can see some of this, but some of it was very fantastical. You know, he claimed that Disney was a rampant pedophile and all these things that I didn't really buy into. And then they talked about how there were, you know, underground tunnels underneath Disney, which there are, how they move
that they give tours of. We've been on one.
Yes. But they also said, you know, like those are, you know, sex chambers and things like that, which I'm not going to go that far. But on the other hand, there are a lot of kids that go missing in Disney also.
Well, and to that point, and we were talking about before with the media and stuff, and Disney owns the media, right? They own ABC, which is a huge thing. But one thing I was thinking about today when I was thinking about questions for this podcast is you don't hear about the violence and the kidnappings and all that crazy shit that goes down in Disney because they own the media. So, and if you think something that has that many people there every day doesn't have murders, people getting raped and stuff like that, you're crazy. But they're able to hide it because they own the media.
Well, they always say nobody dies at Disney, right? They always take people off site, and that's where they pass away in the hospital or whatever. And that's an interesting one because especially when they set up Walt Disney World down in Orlando, they also, in addition to creating and acquiring the land and building it, they also set up what they called phantom cities, okay, which is Bay Lake and Lake Buena Vista, which are towns where the population's like, I know in 2010, it was 10 in one of the towns and like 47 in the other one. And those people are hand selected to live there. And because they're hand selected to live there, the way they set up the town is that the only way that you can be in the local government is you have to be a landowner or a trustee in the town. Well, who appoints the people that are allowed to live there and be trustees? It's Disney. So they have this, you know, a network set up where they have, you know, essentially control the police force in that area. You know, they've essentially set up a safe zone where they can't be touched. And in some of my readings, you know, I came across, they said that Disney's so powerful that the United States government couldn't even come in and shut down one of their rides. They don't have the power to, because the way Disney has it laid out, that it's their land and they can do what they want with it.
Almost like the Vatican.
Yeah, or DC, right? Yeah. And that was the part that blew my mind, is how they acquired Walt Disney World land and built that out. And it's just brilliant, evil brilliance, but they beat the system on it. You know, they teamed up with the CIA and they built these, what they did is Disney teamed with two ex-CIA spooks. Okay, one is Wild Bill Donovan, who was the head of the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. And then Paul Helwell, who was a CIA agent in Southeast Asia, who was notorious for setting up shell companies to help fight communism. And so he teamed with these guys. And what Donovan did, Donovan had the legal firms. So he set up these shell companies that would go out and buy parcels of land in Orlando and get them on the cheap. And, you know, people started wondering, well, who's buying up all this land? Why is all this land going up? Well, what they did is they then paid some media and put out some propaganda to kind of get people off their track. They would say, oh, it's the Ford company, or, you know, it's so-and-so buying up all this land. When in reality, it was Disney setting up all these, you know, acquiring all this land. And they were doing it, you know, they were getting land for as cheap as $80 to like $200 an acre, because it was, you know, a lot of it was swampland or marsh or whatever. And as soon as it came out that it was Disney that was buying up all this land, the property value went up to $80,000 an acre. So, but at that time he had already acquired like 27,000 acres or something, like 40 square miles of land. So at that point, he got his mission accomplished, and they did it for like an average of like $200 an acre. So he made out like a bandit on the land itself. But, and then, Hellwell was the one who set up these phantom cities like Bay Lake, Lake Buena Vista. And then they also set up what's called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which is the, the maintenance and the ambulance corps, the firemen, all that stuff. So they basically created, like you said, a Vatican type world within a world. And they're kind of their own little island in there in the middle of Florida.
Well, and it's funny, if you walk down Main Street and you know what to look for, all those CIA agents and all those shell companies or names on all the stores on top. And the funny thing is, I think about all this is when you go on these tours, they tell you all this stuff. Like they tell you all the CIA stuff. And it's funny because, I think when a lot of people think about Disney, they think about getting brainwashed through watching cartoons or watching the program, but they don't realize when you go to any Disney park, you're going into a fake environment that has been artificially created, whether it be the binaural beats in the background that are there controlling you some sort of way, whether it be the smells that they pump into the atmosphere that they do better than anyone else. Like they are creating these false atmospheres to kind of get these certain impulses out of people. People spend like 20 grand to go to Disney World for their family, and just to buy a bunch of shit that is like crap and you're never going to use besides in Disney. And people don't realize like, oh, maybe it's because I have the box from Batman Forever on my head and I'm being brainwashed. But like that's what it is. And same as you, when people used to tell me, because when you have a Mickey Mouse tattoo, people tend to like want to know why you have a Mickey Mouse tattoo. And they like the anti-Disney people have always come out in force. They'll always be like, oh, he's a pedophile or, anti-Semitist or stuff like that. And me, I was always like, no, same as you. But now as I start to realize, all the stuff I was saying and realize what they do when you're there, and listening to your podcast yesterday, talking about, kids go missing and all the monarch stuff that goes down in the park that people aren't even aware of.
Yeah, it's amazing, to think about that, because like you think about Disney, it's deemed the happiest place on earth. But and that's the image they put out there, and right, and that's the same thing with Walt Disney too, personally, right? He was a two-sided man, right? He was flawed just like everybody else. He was a chain smoker. He was a misogynist. He wouldn't let women be animators. So, I mean, he did have his flaws. Now, is he a raging pedophile and all this stuff? I can't say for certain, and I wouldn't even, speculate. But from what I've seen, no. But at the same time, he's not the Uncle Walt that they present him as, right? This crispy, clean, white image man who is unflawed. I mean, this guy had issues, and it shows, but the other thing you have to understand with Walt Disney, the company, is that a lot of this, the stuff that is going on was after Disney's death, so, and one of the things I got into big in my, is the death of the parents, right? That theme in his films and his cartoons. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that, in the 40s, he sent some workers over to his parents' house to have them fix the boiler. And what happened was, they must have done something wrong, because the next day, help came over to his house and found his mother dead on the floor, and his father was, passed out, and they brought him to the hospital and he survived. But it was from carbon monoxide poisoning. So Disney lost his mother, in his probably late 30s. And people automatically say, well, that was, that's why they have all this death of the parents, it's because he, regrets what happened to his mother. But in reality, there were only 3 movies that came out that had any death of parents in them during his lifetime. It was Snow White, Cinderella, and I believe Bambi were the only 3 that happened. All the others happened after he was deceased. So, there are some holes in that, but you see the mind control or the death of the parents kick up after his death. And you wonder, was that Roy's doing, or was that the CIA message they're trying to push? Because now you see it, and essentially what they're pushing is the breaking up of the nuclear family, right? You see all these strange one-off families and people in a lot of their programs. And it just makes you wonder, it's not a true representation of the public, and they make it seem like it's everywhere, and that's where it bothers me, because there is an agenda to it, it appears.
It's almost, you wonder how much of it was from him starting in California and then whatever he got involved with in Florida. At what point did he just become a figurehead? And the OSS and the CIA and the connection to Warner von Braun, was that all orchestrated? Or was he really in that deep and was fully?
They made him an agent because of the trials. Maybe it was an FBI agent, but they made him an agent during the spy trials back in the 50s.
House the unethical American. It was basically the witch hunt, right, for the communists back in 1947. Yeah, he
was that like McCarthyism?
Yeah, exactly. They had him. Well, what happened was in I believe it was either 44 or 45. He was tied in with this publication called The New Masses, which had some communist ties. And there was this guy named Gary Young that they were doing a celebration for, that Disney was invited to. And it really sparked the FBI's interest to check out, is Disney into communism? And so apparently they did a whole check on him, and they came back and said, no, he's clean, he's good. And it seems like almost for that clearance, he offered to testify at this committee. And what's kind of funny about the committee is when he went to testify, who did he call out as being communists? Well, all of his striking workers. Yeah. All the people in his company that were striking against him, he called them all communists and labeled them that way. That way, he's like, they don't want to work for me, they're communists. And then the other one he called out was the League of Women Voters, which I found was real funny at the time. You think about the time, you're like, wow, that's an aggressive move on his part. But, then a couple months later, he recanted what he said about them and said, no, I misspoke. So, but yeah, he was, and he was tied with Hoover. They did some Mickey Mouse Club episodes where they really promoted the FBI. I know there was at least 4 of them that they teamed up together to, put out a good message for the FBI in there. And he also did it with the CIA. I mean, there's hundreds of videos or movies productions that they put together with the CIA over time. And there's even CIA guys who brag about it openly and say, I worked for Disney and the CIA. So yeah, you see it all over, and it makes you wonder, right? Was he in control, or was he just a puppet? Was he just a figurehead? Was he like one of these Bezos types or Zuckerberg types that's just out there to be the fall guy or the face of the company? Or was he really running the day-to-day operations?
Yeah, that's a bummer, because like some of those old school, like 70s, almost like documentary style educational movies that they did, whether it was
with Goofy.
Well, they had like the narrator, and, whether it was in like California or in the wilderness or what. I used to love those things, so I would love to go back and dig some of those up and try to find some of those fun ones. And there was another one, I think it was called The World's Greatest Athlete, where they went and recruited this like Tarzan type dude, and then they brought him to a college in California, and he was like turned him into a decathlete. He's like doing all these other events. I used to watch that one like on loop all the time growing up.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how much of that is real and how much of it was just programming, right? Yeah. Was it just to get a message across to us? And that's the way I look at everything these days, especially, if it's on a television or in the news, there's usually 2 sides to every story, the story at face value, and then what point are they trying to get across to you in addition to it?
Yeah. Well, talking about the news and Disney tying this all together, did you guys happen to see what happened either last night or yesterday in it was like, I think it was Disney Asia or wherever, where they found out that someone had COVID and they locked down the entire park and they tested like 40,000 people or something?
No way. No.
Yeah, I'm almost positive I saw that pop up on Twitter this morning. It was, I forget what country it was in, but they shut it down.
Well, on that tip, Rich, when we're kind of on, Disney shutting stuff down, and Matt, I don't know if you're aware of what they do now, but nowadays at the park, they have to wear like a band on their arm, and you have to like all your dinner reservations and all the rides you're gonna go on, you have to like book that a day in advance. So everything is like they could track you at all times, and like you can't get anywhere in the park without that band. And to me, I just think it's ironic that knowing what I know now, it's like, oh, Disney is just the ultimate testing environment for anything they want to kind of see that's going to work, right? Whether it be something to that extent or back in the day, them testing games, and now you see games like that on apps on phones and stuff like that. But I feel like Disney is like the ultimate testing ground for stuff like that.
Yeah, and they were the first ones to close down during the initial phase of the pandemic, so it makes you think, are they really just playing, and they had to scare everybody and to boost the narrative. But you're right. I mean, think about even what you mentioned before about Epcot, right? It's the city of tomorrow. And they've always been into that. And that's where, when they met with Von Braun, that's where the two worlds collided, because Von Braun saw the television, that 50s, 60s period as the age of television, and a great way to get out your message through the television. And that's why they teamed together and put out at least 3 movies together. And one of them, what was it? What's it called? Man in Space, that he put out in March of 55 was, that was a huge hit. Over 40 million people watched it in 1955. And, that's where it started. And even back then, you go to he did Man in Space, then he did Man and the Moon, and then he did Mars and Beyond. So you look, and that was in the 50s. We're still in that same mindset, 70 years later.
Yeah, they lost the technology, right? Isn't that what they say? They or I love the one that's been going around lately too, is talking about how the president talked to them on a landline, and no one seemed to, your parents or your grandparents thought that Nixon was talking to the astronauts on a landline, and we're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, it probably would have been a party line too, so anybody else could have just picked up and listened. Yeah, there's so many holes in that. It's so funny, because that's what I said too. I'm like, oh yeah, they just they went up to the moon with some aluminum foil on a Jeep chassis and rode around up there. Sure, but we can't go back because we lost the technology. All right.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was you or if I heard it on another podcast, but it's also like, oh yeah, and when the CIA helped Disney acquire that land, they also got two studio lots. Like, why does the CIA need a studio?
Yep. And he did the same thing with the FBI in Disneyland, right? When that opened in 55, he gave the FBI full run for anything they needed to produce. He said, he told Hoover, if you need it, I will gladly support you. So yeah, there's definitely some nefarious things that went on in that. And, even in the whole, here's another interesting one from the whole space thing. Von Braun wrote a book. What was it called? I think it was the Mars Project in 1953. And one of the characters in it is a guy named Elon.
Yeah.
It's and like, you can't make this up.
Well, you just reminded me, I wrote it down here. How much of all of this stuff too is, you often hear in this world of, the revelation of the method, and, things that are hidden in plain sight, and that clears their consciousness of any wrongdoing, or clears them of any bad karma, because it's like, well, we told you what was going on, you just weren't paying attention to it or chose to ignore it. And now, because of the internet and things like this, where people are communicating, it's like, how much of this is, like Jimmy said, that the agents' names are on the buildings and stuff, and it's all just hidden in plain sight. And to the point with going back to Airey and his stuff, it's like, even when you present this stuff to people, it's got to the point where you're a crazy person. You know what I mean? Like, is everything a conspiracy theory, as Sam Tripoli says? And it's like, yes.
Yeah, right. All it takes is 2 people. Two people that get together and want to come up with something that's a conspiracy by definition. So yes, everything is a conspiracy for the most part, and I get that pushback. I don't get it so much on like the CIA side of things and the FBI, because I mean, I can pull out, I went to the, both of their websites and, printed up documents from them and have read hundreds of pages of most of it's redacted information, but the little that you can get out of there, I mean, you can show people physical documents that tie Disney to the FBI, Disney to the CIA. It's when you start getting into today's age where you start dealing with the sexual abuse, the molestation, all that stuff is where they start calling you crazy, despite the fact that the vice president of Disney was arrested for sex with minors. The head of Disney Music was arrested for the same thing, and you've had multiple employees that are arrested for it. Now, Disney has hundreds of, over 100,000 employees worldwide. So, a few bad apples, you can't paint all of them that. But in a company that is based on, children first and supposedly the well-being of children, there is a lot of child abuse that takes place, not only in their programming, but also with their child actors, with the people that are in positions of power in the company. So, is it fair to say that Disney's a rampant, has a pedophile problem? No, but it is in the company, and you cannot deny that. And for a company that has such an influence on children, it's quite disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, and one thing that you had said on, I believe it was the episode 2 of the Disney stuff, but it was with the girls with the blonde hair, and when you see the blonde hair, you can kind of tell you have them, and it goes back to that David Icke quote, like something about having someone in the bars, but there's no prison bars there, but they're trapped in the bars. And that was kind of the connection for me when I heard you say that. Was when you walk around, whether you're in a city or you're living in the suburbs, you're going to see a lot of females with bleached blonde hair, and it's very prevalent. And it's like, oh, they were kind of programmed that way. They don't even realize that.
Yeah, because where do they see it? Right? They see it from their celebrities. They see it on television and they think, oh, okay, I want to look like her. But little do they know that some of these it's not by choice, it's by force, right? And I mean, there's examples, and the most prevalent ones you'll notice is usually when they go to rehab. They go to quote unquote rehab, which some people say is when they get reprogrammed, and then they come out and they have, either a change in look, whether it's going with the blonde hair, or all of a sudden now they're have new tattoos, like butterflies and things like that people think are innocent. But when you dig deeper into it, you start seeing that these are signs or potential signs of the program and the programming that they've gone through. And it's not good. And, it's very dark and ominous, but, it's out there, and I've been called crazy for that more than anything else, is the mind control side of things, because people just can't wrap their head around this mind control program. And I'm like, well, you're in it. Do you watch television? Because if you watch television, you are a victim of it, because that's all television is. Why is it called programming? They're called programs. It's not, it's meant to get a message across to you, an intentional message. And a lot of people just can't understand that concept.
I'm not brainwashed. I just watch The Big Bang Theory every Monday night at 8:30.
It's like those, but it's like the people that live on news networks. It's like, guys, you do not understand what's going on. They're not even journalists. They are paid to push an agenda, and that's it. And a lot of people still can't see that, and that's where a lot of this divide that we're going through right now is and again, going back to Airey, that's what he said. You can put the facts in their face and they will deny it, because it breaks their being, their belief system. They don't have that cognitive dissonance in them to be able to say, okay, maybe what I've been learning or I have learned is not real, because that just shatters a lot of paradigms, and people can't handle that. So Yeah, it is what it is. You kind of have to, yeah, and certain people, you know, you can have a discussion with, and others you just kind of have to walk away, cut your losses, because it's not going to go anywhere, because they've been so indoctrinated and programmed into it. And you know, and not to offend you, man, but I feel like Disney is a giant cult. You know, they get these people in there, and they blindly obey and have blind faith. I mean, look at the Fauci document Disney just put out. If there's not a bigger slap in the face to the American public, I mean, come on.
Yeah, and
Oh,
to your
Telling
point,
you for years, bro.
yeah, it's wild out there, especially when you look at that stuff. You know, the news has just gone totally 180 from where it used to be. I mean, it used to be propaganda, right? Now it's just, and you can't even question it. That's the part that's the most frustrating, is if you go against the narrative, you are silenced immediately and discredited, whether it's with facts or just with they're louder, right? And they have the upper hand. I mean, I've been silenced on social media multiple times for reporting, you know, medical sources, you know, from documents, and they're like, nope, banned, can't put that out there, it's misinformation. Well, wait a second. Who's the minister of misinformation now? But yeah,
Who's
the
paying
media
the
is
fact
wild.
checkers?
Yeah, paid for by the people who, you know, it's like, yeah, you get into that circle again.
Well, you know, the one last thing here about Disney for me is, you know, growing up, the urban legend always was that, you know, Disney was, you know, he died of cancer, and that he was, at one point it was that he's in, you know, he's like Han Solo, and they froze him so that when he comes back, and then it was another thing, well, no, they just froze his head. Have you, in all of your research, have you, is there a vault, is Walt Disney somewhere underground, like Han Solo in cryogenic freeze, in a freezer somewhere?
If he is cryogenically frozen, it's just his brain matter. And because I've dove into this a lot, because I'm trying to, you know, that was what I heard growing up too. Oh, Walt Disney, and you get the whole body, you get the head, you get, you know, brain matter, whatever it is. And after looking at the way they do cryogenics, it would only really be his brain matter that they would have on ice if they do. But from what I'm reading, I can't find anything that would credibly say that Walt Disney is on ice.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, how much time do you put into each episode? Because you connect the dots pretty well, and you know, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and you're pretty, you know, detailed with everything. I'd imagine that you're going into some deep wormholes for research for some of these episodes.
Yeah, some of them are take a lot. Like this Disney one, it was probably a 5-6 months in the making kind of thing. And it started out as a Twitter thread that I did last year. And then, you know, as I started getting into podcasts, different people started asking me, you know, to come on their show and talk about it. And so, and as I go into these shows, like I get good questions, and, you know, I'll jot things down, and it adds to it. So it's kind of a work in progress, but most of my, you know, like most of my episodes, I put at least a couple weeks of research in before I put anything out. You know, because what I want to do is I want to give the best information that I can. Now, am I going to be wrong sometimes? Yeah. Okay. I'm not, I'll be the first one to say, I'm not going to nail everything 100%. I'm going to give you what I find is true in my research. Now, some of that may be wrong. Some of the sources may not be the best sources, but on the other side, I'll be the first one to admit, if you can come to me with a, you know, opposing view that's legitimate, I will gladly say, hey, listen, man, I got it wrong, but this is where I got it from, and this is where I'm coming from with it. And, you know, the point I like to put in my show is I like to give, you know, factual and useful information. I don't want to mislead anybody. And I also like giving some details too, so that people can go back and research things. And that's one of the big things I preach to everybody. You know, it's in my logo right there: question everything. You know, don't believe anyone unless, you know, and even if you see it with your 2 eyes, you can be deceived sometimes, right? Eyewitnesses are some of the most inaccurate people out there. But then if I get into like some of my, I have some deep dives that I've gone into like the World's Fairs, Crystal Palaces. My new thing is Star Forts. I just started digging into those about a month ago. And so all these things, you know, it starts out as a small search. Like I said before, Howdy McCoskey changed my whole world basically, because now I'm so into the old, quote unquote, old world, or, you know, the previous civilization that we had, and which ties into the World's Fairs and all these things. And you know, when you start digging into this stuff, you don't want to just go to any source out there, because the internet is full of a lot of crap, right? So you kind of have to sift through it and see what's good, what's bad. And one example is, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but on YouTube, or on not YouTube, like Instagram and things, there's this pink Tartaria book that everybody seems to be referencing these days.
Jimmy has it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's
People
a lot
are
of
not fans of that book.
No, because, well, it's a hack job, right? The guy copied and pasted a lot of that stuff from other people, and you know, all that robot stuff that's in there, it's all photoshopped. You know, so you have to be careful with this, because there are people out there, especially with the Tartaria train, where people are trying to just make a buck right now. So, and I feel like there are agents out there trying to put disinformation out there to throw us off the tracks as well. But overall, though, I mean, I would say a couple, usually minimum, like it depends on the episodes too. Like I've been putting out some more like hour episodes, and that's usually just a week's worth of research, you know. But I have, you know, I have 2 podcasts myself. I just started up a Monday night roundtable. We call the Monday Night Master Debaters. And it's great. We get like, you know, 5 people on, and we go in with no agenda and just talk, you know, and see where it takes us. And it's always interesting, because you get different people coming in, and we've had a couple of, I've only done 3 of them so far, but a couple of them, we've gotten some great back and forth, right? Not everybody doesn't agree, and we can just have a discussion. And that's really what I think as a people, we need to be able to do better, is just discuss things, whether we agree or not. Take the emotion out of it, and let's just have a conversation back and forth and try and find some common grounds. And it's okay to disagree, right? You know, nowadays it seems like if you disagree with someone, you're the devil. You know, that's what you'll get a lot of the times. Oh, you know, he's crazy. No, why can't we have differing opinions? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So, you know, time is precious these days, but you know, I love research too. That's my thing. I like, you give me a topic, and I love just going in and digging for a while, reading some books, or, you know, doing some internet digs and watching some YouTube videos, or BitChute, Yacht Rockfin, whatever it may be. And there's just so much information out there that, you know, you have to kind of balance it out, because you could, you know, I could go Gordon Rochford style on some of the conspiracy guys and go on like a 5-hour podcast. But, you know, I got my son, I got a day job, so I got to try and keep them to a manageable level. But with that said, you know, in the presentation that I have coming up for the World's Fair, the one on Chicago, I think it's up to like 150 slides now. And, you know, I keep delaying putting it out, because I always find one more slide. You know, I find one more topic. Oh, I should really throw this in there too, because it ties into the whole picture. And eventually at some point, you just got to drop anchor and say, okay, we're going to cut it off here, go forward, and we may have to add on later.
Yeah.
So doing that research for the World's Fair in Chicago and the other World's Fair stuff, what is some of the most interesting stuff that kind of you like to geek out on with the World's Fair, or someone who's listened to this podcast that doesn't know anything about the World's Fair's conspiracies? Where can they kind of start?
I would say Howdy McCoskey is a great source. Michelle Gibson, another one, John Levy is one of my favorites. And there's the guys over at Autodidactic are great. I would start there, because they have some really good videos that ease you into it. Now I'm, you know, probably six or 8 months into diving into some of these things. So I found some great websites out there, you know, random ones. And if people are really interested and want to know, feel free to DM me on Instagram, and I'll share whatever. I just don't have the links offhand in my head. But one of the links is this, I believe his name is John Sank. And what he does is he has links to actual texts and stuff from the time period too. So I've got, one of the really cool things is being able to read, like for Chicago, reading books that came out in 1893 about the fair. So you get that kind of perspective on it. But overall, I mean, the most fascinating is the buildings. I mean, you look at the architecture of these buildings and, you know, the story that goes with them, it just doesn't add up. I mean, Chicago, for example, they put over 200 buildings, right? They built it on swampland. So they had to deal with the land too, and then build 200 buildings. And they say they did it in 2 years, in 1893. So there's no power tools. They're doing it by horse and carriage, and you know, and where are all these supplies coming from? You know, it's just, there's things that you get into it and it just doesn't add up. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Because there is no answer yet, but you can really start pointing us to directions that, and narrow it down to a couple options, right? Either they were there already and, you know, we made up a story, we touched them up a little bit, either, or they actually built them in 2 years and must have had some technology that we don't have access to, or some of them were there and they did build some of them, which I believe is the case. I think that in a lot of these World's Fairs, that a lot of this architecture was already there and they deemed them temporary structures. And they did do some building along the way, right? I mean, I'm sure that they did put some of these buildings in and did actually build, but I think for some of these massive structures, it doesn't make sense. You know, you look at the story and there's no way that it adds up. And the other thing is, it all looks like ancient Rome. You know, you look at downtown Chicago or the center of the fair, which they called the Court of Honor, and it's a spitting image of Rome, you know, with these great coliseums and columns and waterways and everything. And whew, it'll blow your minds.
Yeah, and that's, you know, one of the things I believe they say, like Rome didn't fall, it rebranded itself. They say the same thing. You know, the Nazis didn't lose the war; they rebranded themselves. The Germans were the ones that lost the war. You know, and then you talk about this worldwide civilization and all that stuff. You know, going on the other side of it with Graham Hancock and his research and some of the stuff he has done in his most recent book, America Before, he kind of talks about how he possibly thinks that, you know, maybe the Americas was kind of the cradle of the civilization. So again, up is down, down is up. Who knows? Maybe it was here in the United States where Rome was the Roman civilization, the Roman Empire was this worldwide thing. I don't know. You think there's like you know, maybe it is in the basement of the Vatican where all this stuff is held, all the actual information of what the real history is. I know the Smithsonian has done a good job of, you know, taking giant bones and stuff like that and making those things sort of disappear. Hopefully at some point we'll, you know, either we'll keep digging or somehow, some way, some actual real history will be revealed as to who we are, where we're from, what our purpose is. I don't know. I like to think that way, though.
I do too, man. If we could get access to that Vatican archives, man, everything would change. I have a feeling, you know, and it's unfortunate because you start looking back at American history, and the more I'm digging into it now, I wasn't really a big American history guy. I liked world history, and I was really into the wars growing up as a kid, being that both my grandfathers served. So I was a real war guy. But the more I dig into it, you're starting to see a lot of Egyptian influence in early America, Roman influence, Moorish influence that we really aren't taught about in our history. So it makes you wonder, like, are they trying to hide something from us? And was America possibly like the center of the world at one time, and then a reset happened or something happened and, you know, it spread out? But yeah, it's really fascinating because you don't see it in one spot, right? You see it from New York to California and everywhere in between. I mean, Omaha, Nebraska, Buffalo, New York. These are places that you wouldn't expect to see Roman architecture, but you look at the World's Fairs and they are loaded with them. And you mentioned the Parthenon in Tennessee before. Why is Tennessee called the Athens of the South? You know, that's one of those that makes you wonder. And they always, and one of the things I was reading about the Cherokee that was interesting, they said that all roads lead to Rome was really a reference to Rome, Georgia, because that was the headquarters of the Cherokee Nation. So I, you know, and not knowing why, I've been digging into a little bit of that recently too, because that's ties into it. Like, who was here? You know, who was here before us, and what did they do? You know, it's kind of like that kindergarten cop movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day. Who is your daddy and what does he do? You know, I don't know. You know, I'm trying to figure it out. But the more you dig into it, the narrative that we've been told doesn't seem to add up.
No, the timeline is so, yeah, the math just doesn't work on a lot of, whether it's the build times or, you know, like when they had the year that they had the San Francisco World's Fair, they had one in San Diego.
Yep.
And
well, and
what's
interesting too is what happened 9 years before the fair was a massive fire that leveled the city, right? And you had the same thing in Chicago. Chicago, 1871 is a huge fire that levels the city. Then in 1893, they had this fair. And you just see all these, every major city has a fire. But then how did these cities at the time, right? You're talking about 9 years in the early 1900s. How did San Francisco go from flattened to building up to this Roman architecture in 9 years? It doesn't make any sense.
Here in Denver, obviously, there's no World's Fair stuff. However, the high schools here will blow your mind. Clock towers like you've never seen before. And we always question, well, what was this at one point? The one high school, there used to be a lake in front of it. Now it's a park. It's not a lake anymore. And seeing, I believe it was the 80s. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but there was a whole campaign in Denver where they went around and they just tore down all these historic buildings, and it was to build parking structures, and it was like called Restore Denver or something like that. And they made it like they were going to make Denver better, but there was all these great buildings that were knocked down. And then when you learn about the stuff with the World's Fair and stuff like that on a bigger level about all this stuff going down, it really makes you scratch your head.
Yeah, and like Rich mentioned before too about the buildings, you know, I mean, the buildings just don't make sense. It doesn't. And what you'll find a lot is, like you mentioned, the high schools, or like municipal buildings, town, city buildings,
Post
or
office.
the other thing. Yeah. And as far as landscape, you'll notice a lot of golf courses. A lot of golf courses, they say, are to cover up the mounds that were built and things like that. And they, like you were saying, they leveled an old civilization and then just built a golf course on top of it. So yeah, there is, and that's what if you look at, and one of the things I've been looking into lately is a lot of the wars. Okay, you look at starting in basically you look at the World's Fairs, which is around 1850 is when they started over at 1851 in London. You see these fairs go up and then they either get destroyed by a fire, or they're said to be temporary structures. So they come in and dynamite them and blow them up and get rid of it. Well, then you look into the Civil War. Well, basically Sherman just went down south and just blazed everything in his path. And you're like, well, why would he do that? Doesn't make any sense. It didn't have any military benefit to it. Then you go to World War I, and what happened there? It was just the destruction of Europe. Well, they didn't finish it. So they go back with World War II and just start carpet bombing, you know, entire cities and leveling entire cities. And you're like, was it to erase the previous civilization or the previous, you know, architecture? And it continues today. I mean, you see it, you go and look at how many buildings were built, quote unquote, I'll use air quotes here, built in the late 1800s, and then they're destroyed in the early 1900s, you know, and it's a very interesting thing. And I have a friend on Instagram who happens to live in one of the old world buildings that they don't even really know when it was built. They've been asking her, when is it built? And she's like, you tell me. It's, it's your city. And one of the funny things is that she has some, it is a historical building and labeled as such. She had to have some repairs done. It took them over a year to do some basic repairs, and the repair work was shoddy in comparison to the original. So it makes you think, like, did we lose the ability to even maintain these buildings? And that's the reason why they're destroying them, is because they're going to go bad anyway, because we lost the technology or the knowledge to be able to build these things. And I found that fascinating too, because one of the things that they tell you with the World's Fairs is that, oh, the architects and engineers were just better than what we have today. Really? In the 1800s, with limited building ability and limited experience, we've only been building supposedly for in the late 1800s for 100 years or so. How did these guys have a better understanding of architecture than we do today? That just blows my mind.
Wild stuff. Gonna have to have you back on just to talk about mud flood and Tartaria stuff, because we could go on, and I still have to finish reading Howdy's book. I left it at home because Jimmy was using it for his film. Matt, we got a couple rapid fire questions here. We want to be respectful of your time, but like I said, yeah, we could talk about this forever, and we're definitely going to need to have you on for part 2 of this, and maybe after you go through your stuff in November, we can get you on and do that slideshow presentation with us and stuff. But do you have a daily practice or daily ritual, anything you do on a regular basis that helps you level up or show up as the strongest version of yourself every day?
Yeah, I exercise every day. I go to the gym every day. I stretch every day with a breathing. It's a, a beginner's yoga basically, and then I've fallen out of habit but I really enjoy doing Wim Hof's breathing method, because when I do, I just feel so much better.
Speaking our language, Matt. Conspiracies, health, fitness, breathing. Yeah, we're all about that, so we love it. Are you a coffee drinker?
No, tea.
No, tea. What
lemon
kind of
tea?
Lemon tea.
Yep, decaf, and I throw some lemon, fresh squeezed lemon in there, and some local honey.
Is that a morning thing or an evening thing, or
both?
Whenever? Both.
I do one in the morning usually, and one at night.
Right on. And what are you listening to right now, music wise, podcasts, audiobooks? You reading anything for your research?
Oh man, I listen to hours of podcasts every week. I mean, I work from home, so while I'm not in a meeting, I always have podcasts on. I have podcasts on when I'm at the gym or driving in my car. But as far as books, right now I'm reading Word Magic by Pao Chang, which is, I highly recommend that to everyone. What it is it basically explains our system and how they use words to manipulate us. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it. And then the other one I'm reading is, I don't know the name of it, but it's about ley lines and cathedrals, and it's a great book. Do I have it in here? Nope. It must be in the living room. But yeah, that's the thing I've been reading right now. And then in addition, I've been reading, I just finished actually a book from the early 1900s called Napoleon is a Myth, or The Myth of Napoleon, which was quite interesting, because that's one of the, as I dig back into the 1800s, I'm trying to figure out the mystery of Napoleon, because there's something around that time frame that just doesn't add up with me. And,
is he real?
This is what blew my mind. In there, they talked about how he's basically an allegory, right? I mean, he had 4 siblings, and a lot of the things about his story are very representative of sun and moon and things like that. So I'm up in the air on Napoleon right now.
Have you checked out Ari Aselin's work at all?
Yes. I like what Ari does. The only thing I differ with him on is the whole Mars and
Yeah.
and direct energy weapons coming from space. But I love, see, and that's the thing. I don't have to agree with him. I love his interpretation of things, right? And I like to take in what he's saying, you know, and then listen to a guy like Andreas Zertis, who comes from a different side of it, and you know, you kind of draw your own conclusions off of that. But yeah, I really do. I like what Ari's doing. I've seen him on quite a few podcasts lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the concept of World War Zero and how that, you know, the War of 1812 and the Napoleonic Wars and all that stuff was maybe somehow connected. And yeah, maybe Napoleon wasn't a real guy, and we hear that a lot with the history of Tartaria and mud floods and stuff, that maybe a lot of these people are just kind of implanted into stories and stuff. So
yeah, now that you mentioned that, I started digging in recently. I started digging into Fomenko's work a little bit, and he's one that'll blow your mind because he comes from, you know, he's a mathematician, but he comes at it very objectively. But what he's showing is basically there's certain periods of history. He says up to 1,000 years of history is bogus, where they just took, you know, a section of Roman rulers and then just placed them in a different time period with a different name. And it's bizarre because the time they were in control mirrors almost to a T. You know, whether it was one ruler or two rulers, it adds up, and there's a lot of information out there. Not enough time in the day to get through it all, though.
No, but it's definitely a good, like we said when we started, it's kind of been a good, you know, something to focus your energy on, and probably a more productive energy to put your attention to than some of the other things that are going on out there. That last one we have for you, we know we're in a safe space here, and we're in the tree of trust, so we know we're going to get down with a good answer here. You know, do you have a favorite conspiracy theory other than, you know, working on the Disney stuff, the MK Ultra stuff, some of the other stuff you presented in your podcast? Is there one particular topic that interests you most? Was there one particular red pill moment that got you that is near and dear to your heart?
I would have to say it's just the conspiracy of everything, right? Going back to what got me into it was, you know, how everything kind of ties in when it comes, you get into the Vatican and the Jesuits, and, you know, into how America was formed. And it's kind of just the big conspiracy of, and I said this in my intro podcast, is basically what I want to understand. I want to know, what are we on? Where are we? And who are we? Right? Because I feel like those three things have all been deceived in the presentation to us. Because, you know, you look at the old textbooks, they said the earth was flat, you know, and then the Jesuits came out with the global model. And so which one is it? Or is it none of those? And I'm not a flat earth guy, and I'm not a round earth guy. I'm kind of agnostic, I guess. I don't know what it is. And in all honesty, I don't really think it matters to me in the scheme of things, because it's not going to change my life one way or the other if I find out. But I think it's, again, one of those things that why would they lie to you about that? Right? Why would they change mid form? And yeah, so mine is kind of the conspiracy of everything is my favorite one. And anything that's related to the Vatican is, I always enjoy researching that.
Excellent. We appreciate your answer there. That's a good one. I also had another guest at one point said my favorite conspiracy theory is that people don't believe conspiracies are real.
That's the greatest conspiracy of all.
Yeah, totally.
Matt, thank you so much for your time today. And I must say, you do the best Disney research out there. As someone who's been looking for all the conspiracy stuff with Disney and finding you are the king when it comes to Disney, and tying all those and taking all the research from all the people who've written the books and putting it together. So keep up your great work. I love the product you're putting it out, and thanks again for your time tonight.
Oh, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's an honor and pleasure, Matt. Like I said, we'd love to have you back because I'd love to get more into the World's Fairs and Tartaria and all that stuff and go down the Star Fort wormhole, because I present that stuff to people and they're just like, well, it's just a really good, intelligent design for a fort. I'm like, it's on an island. How did they do that 200 years ago?
Down in the middle of the ocean, you know? Yeah, no big deal. Yeah, and I'd love to have you guys, if you're interested, to join us one night on the Monday night roundtable.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm just trying to get a little bit of everybody and get as many voices on there and opinions as possible. So we'd love to have you there too.
Yeah, it would be an
Absolutely.
honor.
Yeah, count us in for sure.
Excellent.
Cool.
All
Have
right,
a good
Matt,
one,
thank
Matt.
you very much. Have a great night.
You too, guys. Thank you.
Take care.